Look at what's happening in the world of business. The Absa Vehicle and Asset Finance Bulletin has been released. What are the findings, Tumi-san?
That's correct, Hugo, and good afternoon. A mixed picture of the automotive sector, from trends to sales and provincial activity. For more on this, we are joined by Henry Botha from the Absa Vehicle and Asset Finance. Welcome and thank you for your time, Henry. Let's first talk through the highlights of this report. What exactly is it revealing in finer detail?
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. So we looked at consumer trends, comparing it from this year, the first quarter of this year, to 2019, to see what vehicles these customers are buying or what they are applying for. Is it used vehicles? Is it new vehicles? So that was mainly what we looked at. Also the age, the gender, the age of the vehicle that they're buying, just to see what interesting patterns come out of it and where we should focus our finance products.
For quite some time, we know that the pre-owned vehicle sales have been performing quite well. Is that still the case?
It is definitely still the case. So effectively, during the COVID lockdowns, we've lost about 250,000 vehicles that weren't sold as new vehicles. So all that pressure has shifted to the used vehicles, where customers have to find then different types of vehicles that they can buy.
Having said that, Henry, what picture of the new vehicle sales does this figure paint? Because traditionally, we know that due to consumer financial constraints, the used vehicle market is the one that is a leading performer.
Correct. So what was interesting was looking at new vehicles, especially from which countries they originate from or the brands that they originate from. So we started comparing vehicles that come from Europe and the US, and vehicles that come from South Korea and Japan, and also the vehicles that come from India and China. So what we saw was that there was a marked decrease in vehicles that are of higher value that come from European countries, and a significant increase again on Japanese and South Korean vehicles. And then turning our attention to the Indian and Chinese market, that market had a 6% share in vehicle sales in 2019 in the first quarter, and that increased to 8%. And I think it's going to increase even more as this year goes on.
That's interesting, Henry, because it paints a picture of healthy competition between the market participants. What then is expected, as you alluded to, the near-term outlook being that of robust competition going forward?
I think it does. So as you've got different challenges across the world, especially in Europe now, with supply chains and being able to manufacture vehicles, you've got some other countries that's able to bring in vehicles also at an exchange rate that is more favorable. And that competition is definitely lining up in South Africa, especially since the demand for vehicles hasn't dropped. It's still the same as 2019, which is not necessarily a good thing. We would want the economy to grow and for demand to increase, but the supply has been hampered. So all that has shifted to the used market, where you now sit with vehicles of age, customers applying for vehicles that are much older. Previously, you would see in excess of 60% of vehicles being younger than 3 years in the used market. That has dropped because those vehicles don't exist. The rental market didn't buy those vehicles. And you see now increasing 9-year-old, 12-year-old vehicles being applied for finance currently.
I'm glad that you mentioned the rental side of vehicle sales. What's performance like there? Because we do know that it was hampered by the COVID-19 restrictions.
Yes, so for that year, 2020, that dropped to zero, where you would have zero sales into the rental market. Actually, the rental market was defleeting into the used market. So you had this very short period of prices falling in the used market, but then because that stock didn't exist, those prices started increasing. But we're back now to almost normal levels of vehicles being supplied to the rental market, where it's between 5,000 and 10,000 units going into that market on a monthly basis.
Another interesting factor here, Henry, is the side of energy vehicles, the production as well as sales thereof. What is the progress in South Africa, especially as you spoke about the competition between certain brands from certain areas in the world?
That's correct. So since 2013-14, we've had full electric vehicles being imported into South Africa. but they've never been able to take off in the type of sales growth that you've seen in the US and in Europe. What has made a significant difference was the introduction of hybrid vehicles or mild hybrid vehicles that don't need to be plugged in order to get that benefit of what an electric engine provides. So we've seen a significant increase in customers looking for and buying mild hybrid vehicles.
Optimism going forward, Henry, does it exist? As we know that trade as well as business activity is somewhat going back to the so-called new normal.
Yes, so there's definitely the stress of inflation that's coming through, increased interest rates. We've already had 100 basis points this year, and there could even be another 200 for the rest of this year. And also fuel prices are increasing. So that will dampen the demand for vehicles. But we also see way more consumers returning to work, returning to the office to do their work. And that will again put kilometers on their vehicles that they need to replace. So I think there's going to be a balance of demand meeting supply at the end of this year.
We'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for your time. Henry Botha from Absa talking to us about developments in this report, painting a picture of activity in the automotive sector.